These 12 seconds ruined Dumbledore. And I'm not talking about the movie scene, I'm talking about the meme. Every Potterhead across the world knows exactly the one I'm talking about. Dumbledore charging across a room and demanding to know if Harry put his name into the Goblet of Fire. Calmly, of course. The fandom has been using this moment for decades as the epitome of Dumbledore's character assassination in the movies. But what if I told you that you've been blaming the wrong person for this scene? Or that character assassination is a dramatic mischaracterization of the actual problem? Join me as I dive into the history of this meme, compare the book to the film version of this Hogwarts headmaster, and most importantly, clear the name of Michael Gambon and point the finger at the true culprit of this viral error. If we're going to understand how this character was ruined in the eyes of the internet, we first have to understand the anatomy of the joke that did it. The origin of this meme is actually pretty straightforward. Back in the year 2000, J.K. Rowling released Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. In Chapter 17, after the goblet spits out a fourth champion, Harry is corralled into a back room with the other competitors and the teachers. The text specifically describes the headmaster's reaction like this: "Did you put your name into the Goblet of Fire, Harry?" he asked calmly. 5 years later, the film adaptation was released, and as we all know, Michael Gambon's Dumbledore didn't exactly ask calmly. He growled the question at Harry while practically tackling him into a table of trophies. It was a stark contrast, sure, but for years it was just a funny little observation shared amongst die-hard fans. And everyone at that time knew that the Goblet of Fire was the least faithful adaptation out of the 4 movies that had been released up to that point. And this is where typically something like this would fade into oblivion, but not this time. In 2008, we got our first taste of the meme, with a piece of fan art posted online that displayed a side-by-side comparison of the book and movie scenes. Then in 2011, we got a Tumblr post featuring a GIF of the scene with some aggressively misspelled all-caps text that went semi-viral. But it wasn't until a few years later that this joke truly breached containment. On March 28, 2016, a random YouTube user uploaded a beautifully simple 12-second video. It spliced the soothing, gentle audiobook narration of Stephen Fry reading the line, "He asked calmly," immediately followed by the jarring, chaotic audio of Michael Gambon practically shouting it in the movie. That 12-second clip was lightning in a bottle. It gained millions of views almost overnight, and as of me making this video, it has 57 million views on YouTube alone. That's not even accounting for everyone who's ripped it off and posted it elsewhere. Suddenly, the asked calmly discrepancy wasn't just an inside Harry Potter fan joke. It was an internet-wide sensation. The internet took this concept and absolutely ran with it in a way that only the internet can. People who weren't even Harry Potter fans, people who hadn't touched the books or seen the movies, started making their own edits and videos just to profit off the sheer virality of the trend. It became a fill-in-the-blank meme template for literally any piece of pop culture. You've probably seen the different variations. "You shall not pass," said Gandalf calmly to the nice little Balrog. Or, "I am your father," Darth Vader said calmly. But here's where the meme stopped being a harmless joke and started becoming a problem. Through sheer, relentless repetition, this meme calcified into a fact. Millions of people watched that 12-second clip and collectively decided that Michael Gambon was an aggressive actor who completely ruined the character of Albus Dumbledore, all because he clearly didn't care enough to read the source material or be accurate to the book version. And just like headlines on the news, memes have a way of warping the reader's perspective, especially if that person only has a vague knowledge of the source material. Instead of die-hard Harry Potter fans laughing about this absurd little change, fans on the fringe who didn't really care much for the wizarding world started forming rash opinions about the actor and his impact on the role of Dumbledore, all because of a 12-second meme. But as someone who has literally gone through these adaptations page by page and scene by scene, see my other work on this channel for that, I can tell you that the internet got this completely backwards. And the first step in proving this is taking a look at the actor who came before Michael Gambon. We need to look at Richard Harris. Richard Harris was the original Dumbledore in the first 2 films, and then after his passing, he was replaced by Michael Gambon. There's no denying that there was a palpable shift in the personalities and styles of these 2 Dumbledores. And in Gambon's debut in Prisoner of Azkaban, fans definitely felt the change. Now, let me be incredibly clear right off the bat. I'm not here to bash either of these legendary actors. This isn't a competition to prop one up at the expense of the other. Both men were titans of the screen and both delivered deeply impactful performances in their own right. But if fans went into the later movies expecting a carbon copy of Richard Harris after his tragic passing, they were always setting themselves up for disappointment. And in order to understand why the cinematic Dumbledore changed so drastically, we have to look at one of the biggest, most weaponized arguments used against Michael Gambon online. If you've ever scrolled around the Harry Potter subreddit and looked at the Richard Harris versus Michael Gambon posts, then you've probably seen this in the comment sections. Fans love to tout the fact that Gambon didn't even read the books. They use this as the ultimate indisputable proof, the final nail in the coffin, that he simply didn't care about the role or the character. But here's a reality check that a lot of fans aren't ready for. A massive portion of the cast hadn't read the Harry Potter books when they signed on. Tom Felton, for example, famously hadn't read a single page of J.K. Rowling's work when he auditioned, yet he still managed to give us a pitch-perfect, iconic Draco Malfoy. And more importantly than that, neither did Richard Harris. That's right, the actor that fans constantly hold up as the lore-accurate, ultimate purist version of Albus Dumbledore didn't read the source material either. It's actually astonishing the amount of fans that I saw online posting that Richard Harris was a fan of the books. I mean, this was so prevalent that I had to double check my research because I was seeing dozens and dozens of comments saying that Gambon had never read the books, but Richard Harris had. So just to lay the proof down so that everybody is aware, here's an interview with Richard Harris after the filming of The Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah.
Had you read the books? Were you a fan?
No, I never read the books even yet.
You haven't read the books. So
No.
why did you want to do Dumbledore? What made you say yes?
My granddaughter made me.
Made you.
Yeah. She told me she'd never speak to me again if I didn't do it.
In fact, Harris famously turned the role down multiple times. In interviews, Harris is noted as saying that every time they came back to him with a larger and larger salary, but he just couldn't accept because he knew that taking the role meant signing up for 7 straight years of filming. And in his old age, he wasn't sure how much longer he had to live. He didn't want to spend the last 7 years of his life on a film set. So what changed his mind? Well, he only finally agreed to put on the robes because of his 11-year-old granddaughter, who threatened to never speak to him again if he didn't take the role. Now, I know the immediate counter-argument here. Fans love to point to one of the best adaptations ever made, The Lord of the Rings. They'll say, well, Ian McKellen kept the book right by his side during filming, and Christopher Lee read the series every year. And those statements are absolutely true. But look at the context. The Lord of the Rings was published in the 1950s. Those actors had decades to experience the story. They were already massive fans of the text long before Peter Jackson's movies were ever greenlit. But for Richard Harris and Michael Gambon, at the time of casting, the Harry Potter books had only been published within the last 3 or 4 years, and they were heavily marketed and sold as children's books. To have this lofty expectation that an old-school actor in his 60s or 70s is going to read through an entire ongoing children's book series before starting a film is frankly ridiculous. And I think it's important to acknowledge both of these actors' backgrounds. Harris and Gambon were both born in Ireland. They both cut their teeth in the mid-20th century classical theater scene. In their professional philosophy, your job as an actor wasn't to go home, lock yourself in your study, and become a lore expert. Your job was to show up to the set, read the script you were handed, and bring those specific words to life. Richard Harris gave us that gentle, whimsical, soft-spoken grandfather figure in the first 2 films because that is exactly what the director, Chris Columbus, and the script asked him to do. And Michael Gambon was just as passionate, just as dedicated, and just as deeply invested in giving the absolute best performance he could for the role. But for a classically trained actor, giving your best performance means trusting the people behind the camera, following the script and the direction given to you. And that is where the real blame for the Goblet of Fire meme actually belongs. So let's take a peek behind the curtains on how a blockbuster movie is actually made. Because the internet seems to think that an actor just walks onto set, decides exactly how they want the scene to play out, and the cameras just happen to capture it. Not to burst your bubble, but even for the most famous actors, that's not how this works. In fact, it's important to keep in mind that actors are employees, and 99% of the time, they are completely replaceable if they act up. A great example of this is Stuart Townsend, who was meant to play Aragorn in The Lord of the Rings, but refused to practice sword fighting, ride horses, or get into character at all. Just a few weeks into filming, he was replaced by Viggo Mortensen. Anyway, the reality of filmmaking is a massive, highly controlled pipeline. A single scene goes through dozens of touch points. First, a writer adapts the scene into a script. Then, a director envisions how that scene should look and feel, giving the actor specific instructions on the tone and delivery. The actor performs it, usually doing several different takes ranging from quiet to explosive to whatever the director wants. Sometimes one scene can take days or weeks to film if the director doesn't feel like they've gotten the right take. Then, an editor sits in a dark room months later after all the filming has wrapped and post-production has begun, and they select the specific take that best fits the movie's pacing. And finally, a team of producers signs off on the final cut. Michael Gambon's acting was just one of those touchpoints. Despite his face being the one plastered all over the meme, there were a million moving parts behind the scenes that manufactured that exact moment. And if we look closely at the people pulling the strings behind the camera for the Harry Potter franchise, we don't find a unified vision. We find a rotating door. While the core cast of actors remained incredibly consistent over a decade, the leadership did not. The films were steered by 4 different directors: Chris Columbus for the first 2, Alfonso Cuarón for the 3rd, Mike Newell for the 4th, and David Yates for the final 4. The writing duties were handled entirely by Steve Kloves, except for The Order of the Phoenix, which was written by Michael Goldenberg. And the producer chairs were a shifting mix of David Heyman, Chris Columbus, Mark Radcliffe, David Barron, and eventually J.K. Rowling herself. Every single time one of those directors or producers changed, the visual style, the pacing, and the tone of the characters shifted with them. There is absolutely no doubt that if Chris Columbus had stayed in the director's chair, he would have maintained that warm, grandfatherly Dumbledore, and Michael Gambon would have delivered that performance flawlessly. This is also why The Prisoner of Azkaban and The Goblet of Fire have distinct styles, because they're the only 2 movies that have one-off directors. So if we're going to point the finger anywhere, it should be at Mike Newell, the director of the 4th film. Newell's vision for the 4th movie was an intense, high-stakes, hormonal thriller. He wanted conflict. He wanted tension. So when Steve Kloves wrote the adaptation of that chapter and Mike Newell directed it, I can almost guarantee that they deliberately instructed Gambon to be aggressive. My bet is that they wanted the audience to feel the sheer panic of the situation. If the most powerful wizard in the world is losing his cool, things must truly be dire. After all, the 4th book is one of the longest in the series, and because of this, the movie had to make a lot of cuts. You can check out my Movies vs. Manuscript series on my channel if you want to know every single change they made. But anyway, I'm guessing that the choices like this one were made in an attempt to convey the severity of the situation in the limited time that they had. The book had dozens of chapters to build tension, while the movie only had minutes. Over the years, the nuance of this filmmaking process was completely lost. What started in the fandom as a critique of The Goblet of Fire being a flawed adaptation was slowly watered down by the virality of a 12-second clip. The conversation mutated from "the director made a weird choice here" into a targeted hate campaign against Michael Gambon's portrayal. Simply put, the internet needed a face to blame for the changes they didn't like, and Gambon became the ultimate scapegoat for a creative decision that was made by a team of writers, directors, and editors. Gambon was just doing his job, and I think one of the best pieces of evidence for this is the fact that almost every Harry Potter fan will agree that Michael Gambon's acting was superb, and it was just his version of Dumbledore they didn't like. Essentially, the thing the fans liked, Gambon's acting, was the only thing he had control over, and the thing the fans didn't like, the movie version of Dumbledore, was everything he had no control over. And that's what I believe is one of the most important parts of this entire video. The fact that this extends beyond a single scene in The Goblet of Fire. This narrative has seeped into the entire view of Michael Gambon's Dumbledore in the final 6 films. While Harris passed away in his prime and is remembered fondly, Gambon had to finish the job. The reality is, there are hundreds of changes between the books and movies, and you can trust me on that because I've documented almost all of them. Almost every single character was dramatically altered in some way to fit the screen. The film stripped away much of Ron Weasley's loyalty and strategic mind, turning him into pure comic relief. Yet fans don't relentlessly blame Rupert Grint for those changes. So why do we do it to Michael Gambon? Because of the strict time constraints of a film, the story demanded a more dramatic, commanding presence. The films needed a general. They needed someone who could instantly take charge and push the pace of the visual medium. There's no doubt that the movies are drastically different from the books. That is a fact. But we can either endlessly complain about those changes, or we can just enjoy what has been given to us. Personally, I don't find Gambon's version of Dumbledore to be character-breaking. In fact, growing up, I actually preferred it. 13-year-old me always wanted to rush through the first 2 films just so I could finally get to the good Dumbledore. Obviously, as I've grown up, my views on the intricacies of this character have matured, but I still view Gambon's portrayal as an excellent, hardened representation of the only wizard that Voldemort ever feared. And I just never got that with Richard Harris. Which leaves us with one final question. How will people remember Michael Gambon now that he is gone? Will he be infinitely memed, framed forever as the scapegoat for Mike Newell's errors? Or will we accept him for what he truly was, the Dumbledore of an entire generation? Now that we've reached the end of the video, let me introduce myself. My name is Gibby, and this is my channel, Factor Fantasy Harry Potter. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Dumbledore and the behind the scenes of the films, then I'd love for you to hit subscribe and join the community. Also, I've got a Lord of the Rings channel called Factor Fantasy and a channel where I talk about pretty much anything I want called Gibby, so be sure to subscribe to both of those. Thank you to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, Drix, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.